Hello. So we will begin maybe, let me see whether everyone is here now. I think some presenters are still not here. We will wait for maybe 5 more minutes. Okay. Thank you.
Professor,
Yes.
may I ask a question?
Yes.
I just wanted to know, so for the project, do we have to submit the data set and the training weights, or just the
No,
script will be fine?
just as a code and the report. Okay. So data and the model you don't have to submit. Okay.
Yeah, yes, okay. So I submitted the Jupyter file and I wrote the report in the file, Jupyter file
Okay.
itself. Thank you so much.
Okay. I think the first presenter, we're still waiting for chat. Okay. So let's wait for a few more minutes. Okay, so time is up. Let's begin. Okay, so our first presentation will be given by Charles Murchison. The title is Implementation of a Mask RCN on the fastener dataset. Let me give Chad the co-host so that Chad can share the screen. All right, Chad. Now it's your turn. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. So for my project, I did what most people probably did, which was an implementation of the Matterport mask RCNN that had been made available when we were first kind of discussing the projects. So I decided to run mine on Google Colab. It was just the easiest thing to do. Hold on a second. I'm getting dings. I'm not sure if I need to allow people in. They should be able to get in. So like I said, I did my implementation in Google Colab just because given the size of the data set, it really needed to be done on a, sorry, I'm, okay. Yeah, again, I'm not sure if people are trying to get in or not.
Okay, so we can, if you want, we can wait for 5 more minutes because I see people popping up still.
Yeah, now, are you just allowing me to share my screen or do I actually have host privileges right now?
So yeah, you are sharing your screen right now, right? So I think you can present as you like. I mean, if you wanna wait for a while, then we can.
Okay.
Yeah.
No. I'll go ahead and go. It's just I keep hearing these. Okay, it's simply people getting in. I wasn't sure if anyone needed to get admitted or not. It doesn't look like they do. So I will go ahead and.
Yeah. So I think because today it's not mandatory participation, so yeah, people may
That's
come.
fine. Okay. I'm gonna go ahead. Okay. I'll just go ahead and keep going here. So anyway, yeah, the implementation is basically just for anyone who hasn't used Google Colab, it's just very similar to just an IPython notebook. Just do a git clone in order to pull it in. Again, you do need to do the downgrades if you weren't going to be doing the update. So make sure you get TensorFlow 1.15 is the maximum allowable version and Keras 2.24. Along with the necessary additional requirements that needed to be added into it. In terms of the load, I basically just split the data set into a combination of testing and training. So from that, we started out with 778 images with just over 119,000 annotated objects across the 6 classes. And then after doing the image split that we had been provided, what we ultimately wind up with are 6,475 panels from 627 images in my training set, while I left over 1,622 panels from 151 images for the validation. Just to quickly show what kind of breakdown we had in terms of the fastener classes. What we mainly see is that most of the objects that were annotated were either nuts or threads, with heads at a third of only about 16%. Between nuts and threads, they account for nearly 75% of all the annotated objects. And we note that like washers, bolts, and pins account for less than 10%. And this is obviously going to be a concern for simply having enough objects to actually get annotated in order to be able to detect these things in subsequent validation. So this is just something that we need to be mindful of because it could be very indicative of several false negatives, where basically the neural net essentially just classifies these things as background noise. So just kind of something that we need to keep in mind. Mm-hmm. So I broke it down, just compressed everything to a zip file that I could easily upload, so I didn't have to deal with massive folders, and then could just unzip it appropriately, easily enough. So now I have everything loaded. In terms of the main file itself, I did an adaptation of the balloons sample that Matterport had posted. The main reason that I did that is just because it already came with code in order to do a read on the JSON file that's provided by VIA. So this just meant that I had minimal amounts of changes that I actually had to do to this file right here. So the mask RCNN that they have uses transfer learning. It's based off of the COCO data set, which has 81 classes and just thousands and thousands of images. And so it's very commonly used for transfer learning, since it comes with a very well-established set of weights. And that's what I wound up doing here. So in terms of kind of the initial defaults, in terms of the fine tuning, the things that we need to kind of keep in mind is that we have 7 total classes. They require background as kind of the initial class, and then we had our 6 classes to account for the different fasteners. There are options for the number of images per GPU if you have an especially powerful like Titan card or something like that. I just kept it at 1, so I'm only feeding in a single image at a time. That was mainly just to kind of slow things down a bit to get better fits. In terms of the epics, I set it at 2,000 steps per epic, and I'll talk about my epic process here in just a bit. I did drop the detection minimum confidence. Again, this is based off of their balloon data set, where they're basically trying to identify balloon versus not balloon. And so they had it very, very stringent because they're basically just detecting a very simple shape. And we would wind up losing some of the more abstract objects if we had this too high. In addition, they have non-maximum suppression in order to kind of do the merging of the bounding boxes that they have for the mask RCNN. I did kind of play with these 2 parameters. They have one for the initial detection, one for the detection phase, and then the other one for the merging. I kind of played with this a bit to see what would happen, but I wound up keeping them at their defaults. There are other parameters that could have been added. They have about 3 dozen or so that you can play around with. A lot of them are mainly based around the like image size and things of that sort, and don't really need to be changed. The only one that, if I had more inclination, that I would have played with would have been the weights that you can ascribe to the various different losses that are put together. So when they actually do this, they have a loss for the bounding box and a loss for the mask, as well as a loss for the classification. So all of these things are kind of taken in conjunction, because the mask RCNN is unique, and not only in terms of its object location, of not only having a square bounding box to see where in the image your object is located, but then it also has that type mask that actually wraps around the object itself. And so all of these things are used in terms of for the optimization function in this case. So the only real changes that I wound up making here, like I mentioned, were mainly on the definition of the data set. So the dictionary just has the multiple classes that were added in, and this needed to get propagated through a couple of different points. For example, we have numeric IDs that need to get associated with these, and since I have 6 classes instead of the 1 default, that had to be tossed in as well. Otherwise, there are fairly minimal changes. That was basically just for the configuration class that you have to define. And then load mask is just also kind of adapted in order to be able to return the multiple classes from your dictionary. So the only other thing that I wound up changing was this portion right here, which is basically where I'm defining the epic steps. What I wound up doing was 6 blocks of 10 epics for my final assessment. So I actually did 120,000 iterations just because of the number of images that we had. This took a while, even using Google Colab. I think my final time was just about 20 hours to get this thing to run. But it wound up being the best way just to kind of make sure everything got done. So I did the first half by training the heads only at the very end. So just the final outputs, and then the second half, I trained all the layers just to really kind of like fine tune it. But those were the bulk of the changes in this case to the custom, that balloon.py file. If you actually check the Matterport GitHub, this was basically all the adaptations there. In terms of actually running through everything,
just
this was basically where I defined it.
Can you repeat what you just said? I didn't quite catch that. So what are the changes you made there?
Sure. Yeah. So the primary changes in this case were basically just to make sure that my dictionary had all 6 classes. That was the big one. And that had to be pushed through at a couple of points, about 3 or 4 altogether. The other major change that I had was this right here, where the model train call can basically be defined for the learning rate, which I adjusted by slowing it down with subsequent iteration. So every, in this case, every 10,000 epics, I would slow it down a little bit. And
So where the initial one is what? So I do see the numbers as 0.001 and 0001 and then 0005, right? So
yeah. So 001 is the default in this case. So that's what the Matterport has as the default. Then, and that was done for the first 10 epochs in this case. Let me so a little bit. So this is done for the first 10 epochs. So for the first 20,000 iterations. The next step, I'm still only training the heads in this case. And I'm actually keeping the rate the same. I don't drop it. So the first 40,000 is at the default learning rate. For the third epochs, so now we're talking about like 40,000 to 60,000 on the iterations. I dropped the learning rate by a factor of 10 to slow it down a bit, just to make sure that it's not going to keep bouncing around, since I expect smaller changes later on. But I'm still only training on the heads in this case. For the second set of 60,000, what I'm doing in this case is I'm now training all of the layers. Just to get a more refined model instead of only training the heads. But I start out by going back to the default rate, because again, I expect bigger changes that need to be done for all of the layers. Then I drop that by a factor of a half. So I go from 001 to 005. And then for the final set of 20,000, so this is at the very end, I drop it down to, again, that slowest rate of 0001.
I see. So one question. So what's the time difference that you observe compared with just training the head and the training all?
It's actually not that much slower to train the head, to train all of the layers, which kind of surprised me. It's probably only about 15% faster to have to train everything. So I don't know if it's because there aren't a whole lot of layers that actually need to get adjusted, and all of the heavy lifting is being handled by the heads, and it's just because the transfer learning is so effective, or what. I didn't really, crack open the hood too much to really kind of take a deeper look into figuring out the architecture.
Yeah, I also observed something like this. So basically, this model is forward back propagation, right? So even if you freeze, but the you still back propagate. You just don't update the weights, right? So this back propagate takes time. So basically, they do not stop after heads. They back propagate all the way down, but they do not update the weights. I think that's some overhead. So actually, if you try, let's say you get everything right to the layer of the head, and then let's say data, right? So just move your data to the head, right? And then you kind of just tune the head. Actually, that will be way faster at the first stage. This is at least my understanding. Yeah. So okay. I tried some other models, but not this model. I also observe something similar. Basically, because the 50% is really because you back propagate, but you don't do the weight update, right? But the back propagate actually goes beyond the last layer, the last layer of heads.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. That kind of makes sense then. If it has to traverse the entire network and it's just not updating, that's probably a fairly minimal.
Yeah, it's like a bug of the TensorFlow, I feel, right? So they should stop.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, and I don't know if you would have seen better improvements if you had actually used a more up-to-date version of TensorFlow. Because again, the thing to keep in mind is like Matterport did the implementation in like 3 years ago in this case, and the fact that you have to use such a dated version of TensorFlow probably means that it's not the most efficient implementation that it could be. So that's about it. And then just in terms of the model evaluation, a lot of this is just taken again from the Matterport GitHub. You need to define an inference class for this, and you need to be able to load the inference. But again, this stuff was taken almost verbatim from what they had there in advance. And the big kind of, and when you actually get this, you get, and I'll show these in just a second, are images that basically get the overlays for the validation set, and you can compare this against the actual masks to the ones that are being predicted. In addition, you can also get a accuracy precision plot, as well as an overlap matrix, just to kind of indicate how well your classification has actually done, and to see what kind of new classifications have been added that weren't there beforehand. So again, those kind of false positives in this case, so new annotations that weren't expected, as well as false negatives, where an annotation exists, but the network was unable to identify it. The final thing that I did down here at the very bottom is I developed a confusion matrix using some of the stuff that they have in scikit-learn, but I basically went in, I figured out what new annotations were being done, as well as what annotations were missed, and then compared those for kind of my final validation set. In addition to getting the mean accuracy for everything, I also took 30 images and did confusion matrices on those and pulled out 10 that I basically used as exemplars. So just to kind of indicate the final kind of outcome. So this right here was basically me, again, playing around with the configurations in terms of trying to identify what the best model is really going to be. And I eventually just settled on, again, training both heads and layers because I did get slightly better accuracy. This is with a very truncated time course. So this is only like 500 iterations, but this is what performed the best. And then when I did my full 120,000 iteration steps, this is again what I talked about with the adjusted learning rate. This is what I wound up with over each of those sets of 20,000 steps. So for the validation MAP, we see it's pretty low. It's only about 0.22 for the first 20,000. For the second set, we improved by 33. For the third set, we improved to 42. And this is really where things kind of tapered off because once I started training everything, I did see gains, but they were still fairly minimal at this point. And I never actually got an MIP above 0.467 for the validation set. The training set really started to increase. And so I was kind of concerned about possibly being an issue with overfitting by training on all of the layers. That may still kind of be the case. But what I eventually found out was that what's really going on is that the network is doing well, but it's actually picking up a lot of stuff that wasn't brought in during the annotation process. And we can see that down here. These are those confusion matrices that I was talking about. Mm-hmm. We see early on, in this case, this column here is basic. So these are the predictions, and these are the ground truth. Mm-hmm. And we see that the prediction is a lot of background in this case, which is stuff that's getting missed. And so those are those false negatives that I was talking about. And we see those are still really prevalent even early on. But as we progress further and further down, what we start to see, especially once we start training all of the layers here, is that the model is actually picking up a number of objects that weren't being annotated. And again, we need to remember that when we were actually doing the assignment, we didn't take it like super far. Again, we had just been told to kind of get the stuff in the foreground, but the network doesn't know that. And it's actually going to pick up some stuff in the background as well, which is where this row kind of comes into play. Still, even then, we see, not surprisingly, that the nuts and the threads are the ones that have the highest classification accuracy in this case. But again, they're also the most frequent of the fastener types that we were looking at. So in terms of kind of the example images that we had, just to kind of quickly show, I pulled out 10 of these. One of the things that I noted is that objects that were occluded by other objects had difficulty getting picked up. And so we can see here, here's the ground truth on this side. We have a bunch of nuts, even though they're only about half shown. And those are largely missed in the network here. It's still picking up a lot of the stuff that's very obvious and in the forefront, even if it's kind of tiny, like a thread. And the accuracy is pretty good in this case. But if it's blocked, it doesn't do a great job of picking it up. So, and so again, we kind of see the typical MAP. But again, the MAP only goes so far once we start picking up newer objects. And so overall, I would say it actually does a pretty decent job of picking things up. It does have some issues with like pins, for example. But again, where we see a pin that's been annotated, but it wasn't found in the predictions. And again, that's just because of paucity, I think, more than anything else. There just weren't enough instances of these kind of objects for the network to really kind of learn to be able to pick those things up. But it is kind of identifying some new things. Like, for example, we kind of see a head here, and it is actually picked up in this image. And so we see slightly better MAP in this one example. So one thing to note here, there is a pin that's annotated. And what we actually see is down here, the network with the overlap matrix almost identifies it. It's this one right here. But I had my threshold at 0.5, so it wasn't actually brought through on the classification. So it thought it was a pin, but it wasn't confident enough in it to actually verify it as a pin. Otherwise, it actually would have picked that one up. But the thing that we note is that those false positives that I talked about, where it's actually doing a pretty good job of picking things up. Like, for example, we have a bunch of nuts down here that weren't actually annotated in the ground truth, but the network found nearly all of them in this case, as well as some of the ones like this one here wasn't annotated, but the network still found it in this case. So it's basically doing, it is being able to make that additional leap in order to identify the appropriate objects. Because we can sit here and look at this by eye and tell that it's doing a good job, even though that's not being reflected in the MAP for this given image. And like similarly, we see a whole bunch of new stuff over here on the predictions that don't have ground truth. So one thing that I did note is that it does have issues with washers. So we see like washers here, washer here, but it's not picking them up. And I think, again, it's a combination of scarcity as well as the general shape is pretty similar to a nut. And so it's basically probably considering a lot of washers to be very, very thin nuts in this case. That's kind of like my best notion for this. But the fact that there aren't a lot of these objects, again, goes a long way for that. But even then, still does pretty decently. Down here, this is doing a really, really solid job of picking up a lot of these individual objects that are clearly like, this is obviously a head, this is a nut, this is a thread, and it just wasn't being brought up here in this case. Similarly, it's doing a good job of getting threads and nuts over here, even though it's not really kind of heavily annotated on this side, and has the 3 heads here and everything. So the network is doing a good job of identifying these things, but you wouldn't know it just by looking at the MAP. It's only when you really kind of review the image. This one I found really, really interesting. For example, there's a pin right here, and it actually picked this one up, which kind of surprised me. But the thing that really kind of struck me is that we have the stamped lettering here, and the network actually kind of thought that it was some different object. So this is just one of the failures in this case of the network, and I just thought that was kind of interesting. This is probably the cleanest case of when you have a good high resolution image with very distinct, well annotated objects, the network does a good job. In this case, every single object that was found was detected. There weren't a whole lot of them. There wasn't a lot to kind of throw off the network. So we actually have like perfect MAP, like no false positives, no false negatives, everything that was there, it found. And then kind of the final one, this is another good example of it just like picking up all of these objects that missed annotation in this case. So a whole bunch of nuts over on this side, which just weren't labeled in this case. And you sit here and you look at the MAP and it just bottoms out in this case because there's so many false positives, even though nearly everything that was annotated except for these 2 pins was actually found by the network. And then the final one, again, going to kind of failures, we note here that it doesn't pick up the new objects perfectly. Like, for example, this is obviously a nut in the ground truth. This is a head, but it actually got these 2 confused in this case. And it's confident about these, like 0.83 for the confidence here and 0.95. So again, it still could use some work. So just to kind of like wrap this up, I think the way to really kind of test this a bit further would be to get kind of like reduce the image set so you don't have so many low resolution images for a lot of these, have better annotation for some of this stuff, which again, may be part of the problem with the way the images were split. I don't know how much was actually lost on this edge kind of stuff. But again, it still obviously picked up stuff that was in the middle and just wasn't annotated by hand. And then finally,
because when we split image, if it's not completely, let's say the polygon is not completely in that bounding box, we actually drop it, as you can see from the right.
Okay.
So that's why if you get this kind of sample, you cannot pick those boundary objects that is not complete.
Yeah, I didn't have the occasion to be able to kind of like merge things back together, and for what I wanted to show, this did a pretty good job of kind of like indicating everything that
very good job. So as a summary, so I think because a lot of students are also doing this project, as far as what I picked out from your presentation, I think one important thing is that the probability threshold, which originally, let's say in the balloon example, is 90%, right? So we should bring it down to 50%, right? So this is one important changes. Another is that so the others mostly you are following the balloon example, I believe, right? The parameters, right?
Yeah, for the most part, yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
The other thing that I would really change would have been the weights. I think in terms of because again they have different losses that are being calculated. I think playing with those probably could have yielded a lot more in this case. But this was the easiest stuff to really kind of change in order to kind of do the fine tuning. But,
I see. So
but dropping the detection was very key. So
yeah, basically you are saying that like the box regression, the class, right, and the mask loss, and also like the option region proposal, you can like rebalancing them a little bit, right? So this is what you are saying.
Yeah.
Right? But you haven't tried that, right? I believe, right?
No, I didn't.
That's
like,
a little bit.
All I really did.
Yeah, that's not required. That's a little bit terrifying. Actually, they do have this weight vector, but it's a little bit terrifying. Actually, another thing that you can improve if you want is actually there's a class weights in Keras, but it's not explicitly written here. But because this library is written in Keras, there's actually a class weight option that you can say, hey, it's for ping. If I lose, it's like penalize me like 10 nuts or something. This will slightly improve the the pins and the washer, this kind of objects, right? So in case you are interested, you can look into it. I think it's a very good job, right? So another important thing in training that I get from you is that we need to decrease the learning rate. Let's say from 0.001 to like 0.0001, right? So after several epochs, right? So that the great descent can go to the smaller, like lower regions that if your step is too big, you cannot get there. And another thing that I get from you is that in the latter half, you should train all the layers, which is not too expensive actually, because the fold propagation is there anyway, right? So actually it can be eliminated, but it's there, right? So it's like 50% slower. Right? It's like twice slower, but it's acceptable, right? So and another thing that you are looking at is actually I observe that when your training accuracy going beyond 70 something, the validation accuracy is still increasing, like 46 or something, right? So that means it's not overfitting at all. And as you increasing the maybe if you run for more epochs, right? So it's possible that you will detect a lot of unlabeled objects that are actually there. That's actually correct, right? So which means actually there's a lot of potential to keep running this, maybe save it as save the weight matrices and load again and run for another session, for example, right? For the collab, for example, right? So maybe you run for 3 days, it will be really good. This is what I understand.
Yeah, an important thing to remember about the accuracy is that it takes both the false positives and the false negatives into account. And so even though, and because of the fact that we are adding in all of these false positives to it, that's going to drop the accuracy, even though the network, like I showed, was doing a really good job of picking up kind of like novel objects.
Exactly, because of the missing annotations that when you compare, it's not there. Right? So another thing is that you mentioned the occlusion and the partial objects. Of course, partial objects are an annotation issue, right? Because we don't annotate partial objects when split, right? But the occlusion is actually a severe problem where we cannot show the objects because of occlusion, right? But I think that's also the issue of partial objects, right? If you have something that is missing a part of the objects, then the model is not so good at detecting it, right?
Yeah, full nut is fine, like half nut, not so much. So.
Okay, I think very good job. So thank you for the presentation. I think everyone learns a lot in this presentation, right? Thank you. Good job.
You bet.
Thank you, Chad. But one question: would you mind if we finally make this a sample solution share with our students so that they can study a little bit?
Oh, sure. Yeah. Like I think I sent everything in terms of like both the custom Python file as well as my notebook. So feel free to send any of that out.
Okay, so we will send when the semester ends, right? So right now we cannot do that. Okay, thank you for the sharing. Chad also shared a lot of other assignments. Actually, I think we have 2 other assignments also as like the best samples from Chad. Actually, it's even better than our standard solution. Very detailed. Okay, good job, Chad. Okay, so let me see the next presentation. Okay, so. The next presentation, I think is by Sami, right? Not by Latif, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay, you will be presenting. Okay, so the title is Exploring Improvement of Neuroimaging Data Classification Using AC GAN. Okay, so without any delay, I will give control to Sami. Let me make it close. Okay, you can move forward.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I hope everyone can see my screen. Professor, can you see my screen? Is everything visible?
Yeah, I can see your screen. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. So this project was done by Abdul Latif and me. So we are exploring the improvement of detecting neuroimaging data using auxiliary classifier generative adversarial networks. So our main objective is to use deep learning models so that we can look at neuroimages and try to detect what kind of diseases those neuroimages predict. And for our purposes, the data set that we're using is from Abide, and we're looking at the autism disease spectrum to try and figure out if we can use deep learning models to detect with high accuracy what the issues are. But the problem is that there are limited training data, and often the classification performance of deep learning models are very poor. And so we were trying to figure out a way and explore opportunities to improve that. And one of the things we came up with was trying to use a generative adversarial framework to try and improve the models, the discriminator model, because we can use a generator in a generative adversarial framework to create fake data, essentially, kind of closing the gap of the limited data set that we have. And to go into more detail on the data, so the data we used was from Abide, which is the Autism Brain Imaging Data Exchange. This data set essentially parcelate a brain image into n distinct region or ROIs, region of interest or ROIs, and obtain the pairwise coactivation between the ROIs. And if you see, once that has been processed, what we're left behind is something called a normalized functional connectivity matrix, or FC matrix for short. For every scan of the brain image, neuroimage, we have a FC matrix, which is of the size 200 by 200. And this data set has exactly 988 data points. So to give some intuition on the generative adversarial models that we're trying to use for this work, GAN framework usually has two neural networks, and they're usually adversarial and are dealing with each other. So one is a generator and the other is a discriminator. These are the two networks used. And to give an analogy to make sense of how things work, you can imagine a generator as a forger who's trying to make fake images. And the discriminator, or the discriminator as a detective, whose job is to see if an image presented to it is real or fake. So essentially, for most generative adversarial networks, we take in input as noise for the generator, and the generator would try to make an image from that noise that looks as realistic as possible. And the detective or the discriminator will try to figure out whether that is a real image or a fake image. So this kind of goes through, gives a little bit of overview on what the typical generative adversarial network looks like and the architecture for it. As you can see, we put in latent noise to the generator to create a sample. And the real training data set is also fed to the discriminator, and the discriminator learns to tell if it's real or fake. And the generator tries to make its images more and more realistic. And every time they train every epoch, the weights of both of the network backpropagate to update their weights to become even better in the next pass. So the issue with regular generative adversarial networks is that whenever a generator generates any data, there is no control over what kind of data it is creating. So if we have three classes, let's say cat, dog, and horse, in a regular vanilla generative adversarial network, we have no control of creating only dogs or only cat images. The images created or generated by the generator are completely random. To ameliorate and resolve this issue, a new set of generative adversarial networks were created called conditional GAN. And as you can see in a conditional GAN, rather than just send in the noise to the generator, we also send in the class label, let's say a dog or a cat, to the generator. And the generator now learns to create sample images that are conditioned on the class label. Similarly, also for the discriminator, we just don't send in the real image data set, but we also send in the class label for it, so that the discriminator is also conditioned to learn, looking at an image, whether it's real or fake, but also the class label for it, let's say if it's a cat or a dog. But our model uses a little modified version of a conditional GAN, as we've mentioned before, which is the auxiliary classifier GAN. The auxiliary classifier GAN differs from the conditional GAN in the sense that the discriminator not only predicts real or fake, but also has to predict the class label of that object. The conditional GAN only can predict real or fake, but AC GAN is more powerful, and it can also so it's doing two predictions essentially. It is doing a prediction of real or fake for the image, but also the class label, whether it's a cat or a dog. So going to a little more detail on the discriminator, for our purpose, we mentioned that the data set we're using are fully connected matrices, which are 200 by 200 size. What we did internally was to expand the last dimension to make it a 200 by 200 by 1 matrix tensor, because we're using a discriminator that is based on convolutional neural nets. And convolutional layers of Keras demand that you have a 3-dimensional input because it expects a channel. So here you can see we provide the discriminator with the image. We can provide it the X representing the real image, real matrix on the data set, or G of Z, which is a generated image by the generator. So it can take in both of that. And the discriminator will go through layers of convolution to convert the 200 by 200 by 1 tensor into a 4 by 4 by 4, 1024. And then finally, it has 2 output and 2 dense layers. The first output is doing the class label, the labeling of real or fake. And the second output is actually giving you the class label for it. And for every convolutional layer, we use a filter size of 7 by 7 and a stride of 5 by 5. And just to give you some realistic idea of how it looks like in code, here's what it looks like. You can, if you see the code sample for it. So we're taking an image of 200 by 200 by 1 and making it into 40 by 40, and eventually 8 by 8, and then 4 by 4. And finally, in the dense layer, we have dense layer 1 with 1 output for real or fake, where we use sigmoid. And there's another dense layer, which is the size of the number of classes we have, class labels we have, and here we're using softmax. Similarly, we have the generator as well. So the generator in this case has to be conditioned with the class label. So in the generator, we have 2 input. One is the latent noise that we're using and the class label. The latent noise is a vector of size 100, and the class label is essentially just a scalar. So once we have our class label, because it's a scalar and we have to integrate it with our noise vector, what we do is we convert that scalar value into an embedding. And that embedding then goes through dense layers to be converted into a 4 by 4 by 1 feature map. Similarly, the 100-dimensional noise vector is also passed through dense layers to convert it to a 4 by 4 by 384 feature map. And since we have 2 feature maps, we can now just concatenate them to get a final feature map of 4 by 4 by 385. Sorry about that. Right. So once we have a feature map by 4 by 4 by 385, we can now do the exact opposite that we did in a discriminator and do convolutional upsampling or transpose convolution to go from 4 by 4 up all the way to 200 by 200 by 1. And to get a view of how the code looks like, here you can see that we're starting out with a 400 by 400 sample, and we're upsampling it to 8 by 8, to 40 by 40, and finally to 200 by 200. So essentially, you can see the pipeline is exactly the opposite, where the discriminator goes from 200 by 200 to 4 by 4, while the generator goes from 4 by 4 to 200 by 200. One extra thing we wanted to note is that the final activation layer of the generator is tan H. We're using tan H because the matrices, the FC matrices, are normalized between -1 to 1. So it makes sense for us to use tan H function. And then once we have described the generator and the discriminator, then we have something called a composite model, which combines these two separate networks together so that we can have a generative adversarial network. And here in a generative in the GAN model, the input will be the same as the generator input, which is to say the noise label and the class label to condition the generator. And internally, what the GAN composite model will do will take this noise, call the GAN model, and call the generator model to create a fake image, and feed that fake image to the discriminator by telling it to classify whether it's real or fake. And the output of the discriminator, which can be real or fake, and the class label is used as also the output of the composite GAN model. So this in turn is kind of tying together. So the composite GAN model is tying together the generator model and the discriminator model. And if you look at this, you can see in code that here we're using both the generator model and the discriminator model. One thing to note is that the discriminator model is trained separately. That's why inside of the composite model, we're setting the trainable weights for the discriminator model to be false. And here you can see in the GAN model, the input is the generator's input and the output is essentially the discriminator's output of the image generated by the generator. So finally, talking about loss, one thing to note is that this model has to use two different kind of loss functions. That's because the first loss we're using for the discriminator is just to classify whether an object or whether a matrix it sees is real or fake. So it's just binary cross entropy to see, it just says 0, 1, just to say whether if it's a real image that is produced, that is from the data set, or it's just a fake image from the generator. Next, the second loss function we use is sparse categorical cross entropy loss function, because now we're trying to classify not only if the object is real or fake, but also the class label for it. And here the labels are according to this. 0 represents a control group where the brain scan does not have any issues. 1 represents autism, and 2 represent Asperger's syndrome. So that's why, because we have three labels, we essentially want to use sparse categorical cross entropy for measuring the loss for that. Now, training GAN can be notoriously difficult because there are two networks that are constantly fighting with each other to try and be better than each other. So, converging a GAN model can be a little difficult. This particular model can to train this particular model, we followed an article which suggested doing it in 3 substeps. It can be broken down to. The first substep would be to train the discriminator model with half batch size of real data from the data set. And here we use a batch size of about 64. The second substep would be to train the discriminator with fake data set that was created by the generator model. And again, this is of half batch size. And finally, in the final substep, we train the generator model with the batch size, full batch size, but only using noise because a generator expects to see noise only. Now, one of the issues we were facing when trying to build this model was that in this dueling system, the generator simply could not keep up. After the discriminator saw the real data from the data set, it started overfitting to that, and it became so good that it could immediately recognize generated images with 100% accuracy. And what would happen is that because the generator could not improve at all, the training of the overall composite model wasn't really working out, and the discriminator was completely dominating. So one of the tricks we used, it's not an ideal trick, but one of the tricks at least we could use to get the generator to keep up with the discriminator was to set an artificial condition where we kind of were limiting the discriminator's access to the real data by setting only steps that are multiples of 3. That's when the discriminator was allowed to see the real data set. For every other step, for regular steps, it could see the fake data set and the generator could be trained. But the discriminator was only allowed to see the real data set sparsely. So this kind of allowed the generator to keep up and also prevented the discriminator from overfitting to the real data set. Now, we ran for about 100 epochs for multiple steps, and we generated both the training matrices, such as the training accuracy for the real and fake label, and also for the class label. And we also created a validation data set to see how the validation accuracies are. So overall, using this model, we had a validation accuracy of about 55%, and it would fluctuate between 55 to about a 60. And this is the best accuracy we actually got with training with test data set, which is 62%. But this is actually kind of deceptive in a sense because it's the most accurate one, but generally it hovers around 55 to 60 and it's hard to control and converge GAN. Now, in order to kind of test whether our model is actually doing better than a regularly trained generator discriminative model, what we essentially did is to rebuild the discriminator model, but this time train it in a regular manner without the involvement of a generator. So here we just use real label and real data, and instead of using half batch size, we use a full batch size and retrain the discriminator model without the generative adversarial framework. And after training it for the same epoch, we saw that we have similar accuracies. Again, the validation matrices will be from somewhere between 55 to 60. In this case, in test data set, it produced around 51%, but in other tests, it could go as high as 63%. But the overall conclusion that we can draw is that using the auxiliary classifier did not really help very much in this process. Again, the little trick we used to use only multiples of 3 wasn't ideal. We would like to, in the future, test with different batch sizes, because now we're kind of feeding half the batch size of real data and half the batch size of fake data. In the future, we'd like to experiment with that to change the ratio of the batch size, that is batch size of real and fake data fed to the discriminator. And also, one of the things we should note is that because convolutional neural nets are originally designed for image data, it may not perform that well on the FC matrix that we're using. So we can tweak around the model a little bit to try and use other architectures or other ways of parsing through this data and improving this result. But as of it stands right now, the performance is almost the same with the GAN framework and without the GAN framework, and it hasn't really seen that remarkable improvement, but we plan to continue working on it and improve it much into the future. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. So the conclusion that the GAN use is not improving much, right? So I think this is a commendable effort to try this model, but one note on a mistake that you mentioned
Yes,
when talking about, right? So you said that the functional connectivity matrix of the brain is normalized, right? Is this what you say?
Yeah, yes, sir.
Why is it normalized?
So I looked at the README file and they mentioned it's normalized, and even I had the time to kind of look at inside of it, and I could.
Yeah, so my understanding is that it's actually not normalized. Okay, it's just the correlation between -1 and 41, right? So
Oh, okay.
Yeah, let me see. So yeah, because this is more like in bioinformatics, right? So we have all kinds of correlation matrix, right? For example, let me see. Let me call out the pen so that I can plot something. Okay, so for example, if you you do a test as a macro array, okay, and then you have a bunch of genes, okay, and you test them under different conditions, okay, right, and the different condition, different tests, right? So if you will get a bunch of results, right, for each gene, each row have a bunch of results. Is okay?
Okay.
Right, and these two sequences, we can compute the correlation, right? Covariance, normalized is correlation, okay?
I see, I see, okay.
So this is gene, right? So for brain, it's the same. It's just the first region of a brain, the second region of brain, there's a normalization called an NMI coordinate, so that the different people, although the brain is a little bit distorted from each other, but they will do the test, right? A bunch of tests, maybe 100 tests, and see how different regions co-activate, right? So the, react to the same stimulus, so then they have two rows, for example, for two regions, okay? And then they do compute the correlation, right? So maybe this is different functions, so called function connectivity, right? Whether they are connected for certain functions, okay? So I think it's potentially not normalized. It's just the correlation data, okay?
I see, okay.
Another thing is that for correlation data, we cannot use images, right? For example, if you think about images, right? So if you finally want to upscaling to the images, this pixel and this pixel is really closer than if you compare this pixel with this pixel, right?
Right.
Yeah, but in the brain, they are equal in some sense, right? Because you don't know whether they are locationally close or it's just a ID, okay? So that's why this method doesn't work. Right. So I do send you another method, you can take a look, right? So both the discriminator and the generator should use the correlation or the graph-based method, okay? The discriminator is graph-based, generator is correlation, embedding-based, okay? You can take a look, right? So otherwise, I think everything looks fine. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor. Thank you so much to Abdul Latif, and thank you for supervising this project and helping us accomplish it. Thank you so much, sir.
You're welcome. So let's look at the next presentation by Mingyong Liu. The title is Object Detection and Segmentation from the drone dataset using Mask RCN. Right, so let me search for, yeah, I see you. Let me make you co-host. All right, so you may share your screen.
Still not able to.
Oh, sorry, I probably clicked the wrong person. Okay. Yeah, now you should be able to do that.
Okay, can everyone see my slides okay?
Yes, I can see your slide.
Okay, perfect. All right, so my name is Mio, and these are my group member, Obi, Pat, and Deepak. So they've been very helpful in putting these things together. So the title of my talk is Object Detection and Segmentation from the drone dataset using the Mask RCNN. So from the title, you know that we use this state-of-art model, Mask RCNN, to perform the object detection and segmentation from the drone dataset. And this is the outline of my presentation. So to start with, I'll walk you through some basic idea about the Mask RCNN model, and I will talk about the steps that we've been through to achieve the object detection and segmentation. So instead of showing you very complex architecture about the network that I don't necessarily know, in here I just want to talk about what Mask RCNN can do. So Mask RCNN is actually kind of an extension of faster RCNN. So what can be done by faster RCNN are primarily two things. The first one is detection or localization. So for example, if we have an object over here, the model can localize the object and put a bounding box around that. So we know that's a matter of regression. And another thing that the model can do is that it can actually classify the object into certain category. So for example, you can tell a cat from a dog. So that's a matter of classification. So these two things can be done by faster RCNN. So on top of these two things, the Mask RCNN, the reason why it's called the Mask RCNN is that it can actually add a mask on top of the incidence. And in their paper, they mentioned that they somehow preserve the spatial localization of the region of interest. That's why they can preserve this feature. But another thing is that they did not really use the segmentation, or they did not use the mask to perform the classification. So they still use the bounding box to perform the classification. And they say that this is the reason why they do that is because this can save a lot of time. So the reason why I talk about how the model works is because actually different loss functions come from both the classification and regression. So when we train a model, we are dealing with primarily two major losses. The first one is called loss, and the other one is val loss or validation loss. So the major difference is whether or not the validation data set is involved here. And under each spectrum, we have 5 smaller losses. So the B box loss is a bounding box loss. So again, that's a matter of regression. And also we have the class loss. So that's the classification. And under the hood, actually the Mask RCNN also runs another method called RPN. And RPN can also do the detection and also the classification. So that's why we have another B-box loss and a class loss here. So the loss is basically the summation of these 5 smaller losses. And the same idea for the val loss over here. So in this work, we primarily focus on these 2 loss functions, and we determine the performance of our model based off the val loss in our case. So as a first step, I think Dr. Yan mentioned this. So this is the original picture. Even though we can see the objects clearly, but relative to the original picture, we can see that actually they're fairly small. So that's why we need to zoom in. So the way that we can do this is through the image splitting. So we utilize the code provided by Dr. Yan. And in here, we broke down a large picture into smaller pictures. And also we broke down the annotation file. And after that, we performed the model training. And this is the step that we spend the most time of. So in here, we utilize 70% of the data to do the training, and we use 15% of the data for the validation purpose. And we perform the transfer learning by loading the pre-trained cocoa weight. In here, we adopted 2 major training strategies. The first one is to train the head layer and then all the layers. And for the second strategy, we only train the head layer, and I will be talking about why. So in the first training strategy, we adopted this 2-step training. So in here, we have 6 kind of sub strategies. So we always train the head first for 20 epochs under the default learning rate. And then we switch to train all layers. So here you can see that we train all the layers for a different amount of epochs. And we also switch around the learning rate to see how good the model can converge. So this is the visualization of the loss and the val loss. And x-axis, we're looking at a different number of epochs. So again, we train the head first for 20 epochs. So I hope one thing you can appreciate that when we train the head, we can see the loss keep going down. However, when we switch from the head training to all layer training, we actually have an increase in the loss and the val loss. And once we have this increase, the model becomes pretty hard to converge. So we've tried to solve this by changing the learning rate, where we just train for a longer period of time, but the problem is not solved. So initially we thought this may be due to the complexity of the model. So in the previous slide, we used the ResNet 50. So that's a network with 50 layers. So in here, we switched to using a more complex layer, the ResNet 101, so which is network with 101 layers. But as you can tell from the plots, we still did not solve this problem. So after we switch from the head training to all layer training, we have the increase in the loss function. So we did some research on this, and we found that some people, instead of using this 2-step training, they actually have another step where between the head training and all layer training, they insert this 4+ layer training. So basically you freeze some of the layers and you only train part of these layers. So we adopted this, but as you can tell, when we train the heads, we can see the arrow goes down. However, when we switch from the head training to 4+ layer training, we have the increase in arrow. And when we switch from the 4+ layer training to all layer training, we have another increase in arrow. So that's not what we want. Actually, this just worsens the outcome. So, and it looks like the more complex we made our model, the worse validation loss we got. So we switched to using a simpler training strategy where we only train the hash layer. So in here we have 3 sub-conditions. So we train the hash for either the 40 layers or 60 layers, and we also switch around the learning rate to see if that can help the model to converge. So these are the visualization of value loss for the 3 conditions. So as you can see, if we train the head layer for 40 epochs under the default learning rate, we can see the very consistent trend that the value loss goes down during this training, even though finally the value loss is still relatively high. However, if we train the model for longer, this problem is not solved. So across all the conditions, we chose the weight from the epoch with the lowest validation loss as our model for detection and segmentation. So we move to our third step, which is detection from the test pictures. So in here, we only use the pictures that were not used for training or validation. And we pay attention to 2 parameters. The first one is average precision, and the second one is average recall. So we calculate them for all the classes from 1 picture, and we further average that across all the pictures to have a value for the precision or the recall. So I think Chad mentioned this, but I just want to go over like some caveat about the precision. So in here, this is the ground truth. Let's say, so the person is in this blue box. So if our prediction has a reasonable amount of overlap with the ground truth, that's true positive, and there's no problem with this. And then for the false positive case, so if we have too many boxes basically identifying the same thing, that's of course a false positive. But the issue is that if we identify something that's not a person, that's going to be counted as false positive. So this is going to be a caveat because in our case, the ground truth is actually the human annotation. And it's pretty likely that some of the objects can be actually missed by the human annotation. And if somehow those objects can be captured by our model, those will be the false positive. And this will bring the precision down. And that's not really like reflective of the performance of our model. So this is the average precision we got under the 3 IOU threshold. So the IOU is basically the overlap between our predicted annotation and the ground truth. So the higher the IOU is, the more stringent the standard is. So at the IOU equals to 0.5, on average, we got slightly better than 0.2 in terms of the precision. So for some of the plots, we have a very great precision, but for some of them, the model just did not perform pretty well. And for the same idea, we can calculate the recall. So recall is true positive divided by true positive plus false negative. Since in here, we don't have to deal with the false positive because everything starts from the ground truth. You can see that the score looks better compared to the average precision. And I will finish up by showing you some of the representative plots. So in the first set, on top, that's the human annotation, and the bottom, that's the predicted the plot. So you can see that some of the small objects can be detected by our model. And if we move to a more complex model where there are a lot of objects, you can see that our model can also detect some of the objects. And also for the partial items, our model can also detect them pretty well. And for the last one, so this is the one actually, that's the issue that I was mentioning. So in the human annotation, you can see that this part is not really covered by the human annotation, but in our model, we can detect some of the items from this region. And also we can detect the items that are annotated by human. So the limitation here is we still we cannot have the model converge when training all the layers, and we are still not sure what the reason is. And also we did not merge the pictures back because, so one of the issue that we ran into is when we add mask on top of the plot, it's very hard for us to merge that plot with the other plots. And we still cannot figure a way to do that. And for the reference, so I gained some insights on the mask RCNN from the original paper, and we used the code provided by Dr. Yan to perform the image splitting. And this is the version of mask RCNN that we use, and this one is actually compatible with the TensorFlow too. And I also gained some insights on the precision and recall from this paper. So with that, I'm happy to take questions.
Okay, any questions from the audience? Yeah, please feel free to ask if you have questions. I think this is a very interesting talk. The presentation is very well organized, and there's some different insight from the first presentation, right? So, yeah, any questions? So I see that you use the AK12, right? So this is another mask RCNN package, right?
Yes. Yes.
So is this a PyTorch or TensorFlow?
I think this is still TensorFlow.
Still TensorFlow. So this is a better version because it's a TensorFlow 2.0 compatible, right? So
yes.
This is
yeah, I think,
yeah. This is the reason you choose this one, right?
Right.
Got it. Okay. And yeah, I think it's very interesting that you observed after 2-stage or even 3-stage training, things actually even get worse, right? So the loss is increasing. And so, yeah, this is kind of conflicting from what Chad observed, and I think this actually gives some room for other students to explore. So if you are gonna submit late, you can try both methods, see which one performs the best, right? So I think according to what you said, really the false positives is really misleading, right? So and because false positives counted in the MAP, so MAP may not be a reflective metric, right? Is this what one of your points?
So, yeah, that's the point I want to get across, but I don't know how valid that is. So that's why I also include the MAR here, because that's the one that that's not calculated through the false positive.
I see. So basically, I think MAR potentially the better result, right? Better metric, right?
Yeah, because I think in here that's basically ground truth. I mean, on the bottom.
I see. So because we missed a lot of annotation, we only maybe annotate only maybe 10 or 30% of all the objects. In that case, maybe really looking at the recall is a safer metric, right? So that's very interesting insight. If other students you are doing your project, you can also report the MAR. Okay, so the recall may be more meaningful, right? So especially for our application where the annotation is not complete. Okay, so so have you compared the two solutions? I mean, the multi-stage training with all layers in the later stages, right? So another is only heads, right? So are they, for example, in terms of this metric, right? MAR,
yes.
right? So which one performs better, right? And have you visually checked the how, I'm not sure whether the loss is actually, because maybe it's also caused by the missing labels, right? So
Yeah,
I think, yeah, potentially you can take a look at whether both methods, it's really the more meaningful recall-based metric, and also the, visually you check whether, which method is better, right? So that may make some sense even.
Yeah, I think it's definitely worth doing. And actually, one of the things I did not check is I only pay attention to the loss. So that's basically a summation of smaller losses. But I don't know, maybe it's just from the arrow from the classification, or it's just the bounding box. I did not really get down to which specific arrow accounts for the major portion of the total arrow. I did not. Maybe like you said, I think I should have go through some of the representative plot to see how they really look like.
Yeah, we can compare both solutions because you have both model trend. You can take a look and also compare with the recall metric and see
Yes.
whether it's really, only has is, better, because a lot of people say these multi-stages may be a better strategy, right? So, but I think overall, I think it's very well-organized presentation and very interesting insight. Right? So the has only may even be better, and the recall metric may be the metric that makes sense instead of precision, because we have a lot of missing annotations. And yeah, so one answer to your merging code is that you can use NMS, right? Non-negative maximum suppression when you merge the objects. Okay, so if let's say the same part is detected multiple times, right, in different overlapping regions, right? So you can use NMS to remove the other overlapping regions, right? If they are all, let's say, nuts, and their bounding box overlap for maybe 50% IOU, right? And only one will remain, right? So this is my answer. If you are doing the merging, you can use NMS.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
You're welcome. And yeah, I think it's a very good job. And let's move to the next presentation by Isan Atluri. The topic is unsupervised learning of scheduled jobs in an HPC environment, k-means analysis. Right, so let me make Isan co-host. Okay. Okay, Isan, now the stage is yours.
Yeah.
Hello? Yeah.
Can you all see the screen?
Yeah, I can see your screen.
All right. So I did some unsupervised learning for the scheduler jobs in an HPC environment. HPC environment stands for high performance computing environment. It's a distributed system, and we have a supercomputer on our campus. So the way you take advantage of that supercomputer is you submit jobs for your workflow, like the analysis, which the students previously presented, those kind of image analysis, and such can be run through the workflows on the supercomputer. And you could use GPUs just like you use GPUs from the Google Colab. It's an in-house Google Colab kind of thing if you want to use it that way. And it's much more than that, but you can use it that way. And so scheduler is the one which submits the jobs so that you can run your analyses. And so we had a not a problem, but we wanted to understand what kind of jobs are being submitted and how they are spread across the whole cluster, so that we could make better decisions on where we could invest the money and how we could expand the cluster. For example, if there are short jobs being submitted, we could tune the cluster to give high throughput results. Or if there are large analyses that are being run, and there are, and most of the jobs with neuroimaging analysis and all these, they take run on the GPU nodes. So if we could gauge on where the user base is, then we could invest on large memory nodes or the GPUs or things like that. So for that decisions, we wanted to know how the data is spread across. So we initial step to understand the jobs are distributed across the cluster. And I'm going to, can you all hear me?
Yes.
It says mine. Okay. says my internet connection is a little wonky. So, all right, thanks. So I'm just going to quickly cover on how the Chiha HPC system is designed in the scheduler, and how I used the resources we developed, and like it's on demand is similar to Google Colab. I'll show you how I submitted the Jupyter notebook I was running, and I'll finally show you the k-means clustering and the graphs we got. So a supercomputer, just a large computer, different nodes connected with high-speed networks. It's called InfiniBand, and it supports the researchers all across the campus. And these are some of the departments that make most use of the supercomputer. And this is the picture, and this is the resource capacity. We have 6,000 cores and spread across 200 nodes, and we have 72 GPUs across 18 nodes. So as you can see, there are upwards of 1,000 or maybe between 1,000 and 1,500 users, and a lot of them have different requirements on how they use the cluster. So some may submit short jobs for a class, get done with it in a couple of weeks for the final project, and they might never see the phase of the cluster. Or there might be researchers or professors who would be running their computations for a very long time when they're on campus. So, so the motivation, like I said, was to understand what kind of jobs were being submitted, and so that we could know the landscape better and we would know where to invest. So the other application would be how we can tweak the backfill of the scheduler. So the scheduler uses a fair share algorithm to determine whose jobs go first and whose jobs go next. And it's kind of like the time slice in Unix systems, if you know Unix systems. So it would, if you're using it aggressively for a week, then it would say, okay, I'll dial it down and let others use it. So it would, scheduler would decide the priority basically. And so the scheduler we use is Slurm. That's the industry favorite right now. And it's a queuing system, just like you see in an airport or anywhere you have these barricades to put people in the queue. It's just a visual representation from the real world, I guess, I thought. So all the pipeline, all the jobs that are being submitted, most of them would be submitted in a job context to the scheduler, and the job would decide when it would run. So if you ask for 100 cores with a terabyte of RAM, that's a very big resource allocation. So it would take some time, and whenever the resources are freed up, it would just give you the node to run. And I'll just show you the way I set up my Jupyter notebook, and go to Jupyter notebook, and we can get to the meat of it. So, all right. And yeah, so this one, this is the on-demand cluster I was talking about. And so first, I would just come here. There is a job composer where you can compose your jobs right here. And this is the way I set up my environment. And I would run the job, and it would create Slurm Conda environment with all the packages and everything I need. And once that is done, I would start up an interactive job here, get the Jupyter notebook and launch it. and then I would get a Jupyter notebook like this. So I can go into the, like you see, the cluster analysis is my Jupyter notebook that I'm running. And this is how it looks. So once you click on that, you would get your Jupyter notebook. So so I wanted to do cluster analysis on how the jobs are being distributed among the requested memory per CPU and alloc CPU transfer the allocated CPUs. Oops, sorry. And the RAM is just the sorry, elapsed time is the time until which the job is run. And this notebook is pretty flexible, so that anybody in the team could use it, or anyone in the other teams could use it from other universities if they want. And you would define a min-max of the requested memory, allocated CPUs, and elapsed time. And for data normalization, if there are any big towers of clusters, then there is also flexibility to normalize them, to scale them between 0, 1, or log scaling. And this is where you define the start dates and end dates. So you can go anywhere between last 5 years, but I just took 1 month, and it would take like 5 or 10 minutes to run. And this is where I'm defining all the limits. And I said upper limit of 150 gigs, just because 150 gigs is where I did some preliminary analysis, and 150 gigs is where, I mean, after 150, the data points are being the outliers. So, and later I gave alloc CPUs of 260 because a node would have a maximum of 260 the way we have the nodes set up. And so the elapsed time, this is 6.5 days. This is the maximum that you could run a job on a cluster. So you would start it now, and then it would run until the next week. And people do run such kind of jobs, and this is the maximum. And in some special cases, we also extend the jobs beyond. And so I kind of cut it at 6.25 because those extensions that I talked about are just a few exceptions. So they would count as outliers, and not much interested in those. So I didn't do any data normalization here. I just wanted to show you how it would look bare bones. And so so I used Slurm to SQL, which would convert the Slurm data. The job data is stored in a database, and this database consists of like 40 tables, and each table would have like 20 to 40 columns, and pretty big database. And what this tool would do is just convert it to an SQLite file. The SQLite file is what I worked off of, and read it into a data frame. And then I start my analysis here, and I see it, what are the completed jobs and how they are doing. So this is kind of a sample on all the attributes that you get for a job. And these are only a few attributes that are of interest, and there are many. If you go into the database, there would be many others. And let me see. So let's see at the k-means clustering that I did right here. This is all preparation right there above. And I used the elbow method to see where the to know the optimal number of clusters. And so the cost function would even out after this point. So the whole point of k-means clustering is to minimize the cost function, which is the square of distances between the data points and the centroid. And you all know k-means. And that's why I'm not spending too much time on this. And yeah, so I ran the elbow method, and it said from the graph I could see, okay, 4 clusters would give me a reasonable clustering of data. And from there, like I said, I chose only the normalization. I didn't choose any normalization. You'll see in the later graphs when you see that. And so I ran the k-means, and these are the cluster points that I get. And this is all preparation so that I could draw some graphs at the end. So right here, if you see, this is a 3D graph of those 3 important factors that we wanted to gain insight into. There are other factors that we want to look at as well, but this is the first step in understanding how the jobs are behaving, or the nature of jobs that are being submitted. And so if you look at this, so this is a 2D representation, or a one-sided view if you see along the requested gigs and requested memory and the allocated CPUs. So this is a one-sided view on that. And so this is the XY axis view on the clusters we got here. And it's basically the same data, we are just flipping it on the axis, or rotating on the axis, so that we could get, we could just visualize how they are spread out in all the angles. And you can see that right here. If you see some of the yellow clusters, they look like they're overlapping, but this is 3D data. So you're looking at this axis, which is the y-axis, and that's why you kind of look into, that's why they look like they're overlapping. And so once we got these 4 clusters, we wanted to see how each, like what jobs each individual cluster contains. So we did 2D histograms of each cluster. So we would take the purple cluster and see how this purple cluster is spread out further. So you can assume like it's kind of like zooming into that data set and see how those jobs are spread out. And this is what we understood. So this cluster, if you look at these set of users, the purple ones, we came to know that, okay, there are a set of users who are requesting less than 10 gigs of memory, and their usage, their usage time is less than 20 hours. So those are the small group of users, and the later analysis would be like, who are these users and where do they come from and all this. And we have a tool that we developed in-house to help with that. But yeah, once we get what jobs are being in this cluster, then we could go to that tool and see which users are running, and all such kinds of insights into that. And yeah, so there is another cluster where they're using 40 gigs and about the same usage time. And if you look at the CPUs versus the requested number of gigs, so there are certain number of users where they would request a medium number of CPUs and they would use less number of or less memory. And like you see the yellow cluster here, there is a group of users who would request 140 gigs of memory, and we wanted to see how long they run, and they pretty much run below 25 hours. So that's like a day, and that's typical of the users who request more of RAM. And yeah, if you see the elapsed time versus the allocated CPUs, then you would know there are, so all the users, most of them, they request almost around 25 CPUs, 0 to 25, but the usage, they vary. So there is some of the kinds of insights we got, and we wanted to see how this particular cluster was behaving, or this particular purple cluster was behaving, or the yellow cluster was behaving. So we kind of zoomed in, if you will, to each of the 4 clusters we have. So this is the analysis on the blue cluster, and we did a 2D histogram on that, and we saw this is where the density is, and as such in all the purple clusters. So the purple cluster are the people who would request less memory, but they would use it for a considerable, say, 1 day, which is typical of the HPC systems. And if you see the red cluster, they are more, these guys are dense, but they're more spread out. And if you see the yellow clusters, these people would run mostly bioinformatics stuff. They would run for like a week sometimes. So they would request high amounts of RAM, but they wouldn't require so many CPUs. So this is the approach we took so that we could understand what's happening inside the cluster. And the difficulty in this project lies in understanding the data and gathering the data. So, when we did some preliminary analysis before summer, we got pretty interesting data, which we knew was wrong. And we had like over 3,000 or 4,000 cores, but some clusters would run up to 7,000 cores, and we didn't know. So there was a lot of data cleanup, and the way we have to understand what data we are dealing with and what the attributes meant, like the attributes here. So there were a lot of attributes, and to get our head around those attributes and see which ones make sense, and to know which ones contribute that, and to basically consolidate data. So those were the challenges. And yeah, that's it. That's the
Okay. Thank you, Isang. Yeah, I think it's a very comprehensive introduction of the Chiha platform on our campus. if you are a student doing research, right, especially doing computing research, I would definitely encourage you to check it out, right? So if you are just running small jobs like those purple ones, I think maybe Colab is a better choice, right? Ease the burden for other researchers, right? But if you are really needing a lot of resources, like here in this screen, I see like the first plot is a little bit special, right? So I see like in the column 120, there basically it means that the request, what is the request MEM CPU? What does that mean? It's a product of memory.
So yes, it's a product of the CPUs you request and the memory you request for each CPU. So if you say, I need 10 cores and 4 gigs for each, it would allocate you 40 gigs of resources.
I see. So basically when you allocate, you actually the cost is measured by how many CPU you have and how many memory you occupy during the time, right? So
yeah.
I see. So what's the budget? So I see that it can go quite large, right? So like 140 the budget or 200 because you know.
We have a terabyte of RAM as well. The nodes.
I see.
So we have 8 nodes approximately, I think, which allow for 1 terabyte of RAM allocation each. So yeah, you could use it. I think it is 6 to 8, something like that. So
I see.
You could use those as well if you.
Yeah, I see that you have like a 6.25 days, right? So this can really run for multi-days, right? Especially you see the red ones, it's quite long, right? But maybe not many students here have used like a multi-day because I think the default is 12 hours or something, right? So how do students?
Yeah, the default.
Yeah, how do they request for more than 12 hours? Can you shed light on this a little bit?
Sure. So if you go here, when you, sorry, I clicked on the wrong one. And so if you go to the page, it's right here on the dashboard. So Express runs for 2 hours, and the short runs for 12 hours, and the medium runs for 2 hours, and 2 days, 2 hours, and like that. So these are the large memory nodes, which also run for 2 days, 2 hours. So this is one of the partition we introduced just recently, a few months ago. And these are the kinds of decisions we need to make. So if we are introducing new, what kind of memory nodes, what kind of nodes we have to introduce. So we see there is increased usage on the bioinformatics side or the neurosciences side. The science researchers, they need more and more memory.
I see. So basically you have different hosts, right? So different hosts are in different partitions. And so if they log on that particular host, they can use 2 days. If they log on other hosts, they can only use 12 hours. Like the Pascal node, which I think is GPU node, right? So basically if let's say here some of our students can train on Colab for 24 hours, right? So I think the limit is 24 hours. But if they want to train our deep learning model, maybe for more than 12 hours, or they want to train maybe 2 days, for example, is there a way that they can do that?
Yeah, they can. They can.
Yeah.
So you can.
How can they do that? Yeah. Just.
So you can use Pascal nodes, which are basically the GPU nodes.
Yeah.
And it says 12 hours here, but you can extend the time limit.
I see. So there's a way to send some requests. They can temporarily boost, right? Okay. Yeah. So so if anyone has a need, maybe can contact Yisang for this, right? So I think the data is very interesting. I know that Slum is the job scheduler, right? So for the cluster, but I didn't know that its backend is actually database, right? You basically all the logs are saved at the database using SQL, right? So what's the database, by the way?
No, I mean. They use MySQL, but the way they store the data is not the logs. Logs are not stored in the database. Just the accounting information on how long the job ran or how much requested memory has been made. And so those kind of job statistics.
Requests and profiles are saved in MySQL, right? So it is what you say. I see. Okay. And so
basically job statistics, they are stored inside of the database.
Yeah, another thing that I didn't quite figure out is how many dimensions that your data have, right? So I see 2D histogram and 3D like a scatter plot, and yeah, so like training data for clustering, right? So how many dimensions do you have? Like you have the time, you have the CPU run, right, elapsed the time, and you have the allocated CPUs.
Yes.
Yeah, and altogether, what are the dimensions, for example, right? So I don't see the whole data row, for example, like how many x1, x2, x3, how many the features you have here. Do you understand what I'm talking about?
Yeah. For now, we used these features.
Oh, so that's quite a lot, right? So, but you it seems that you some of them are IDs, right? So because I keep seeing you focus on some of those features, like elapsed time and request CPU memory, and also like
yes.
number of
So
CPU.
these are
So that potential means these are the.
So these are the three we really.
So one question is for when you do k-means, do you mean that you only do k-means in each like a subset of the dimensions instead of doing on all the dimensions, or you are doing actually k-means on all the dimensions and then color them and then map to different dimensions and plotting?
Sorry, can you repeat that?
Yeah, so there are two ways of doing this, right? So I didn't figure out. So the first is actually, let's say you have maybe 6 meaningful dimensions, right? So you use this 6-dimensional data to do k-means, okay? And then you get like a red cluster, purple cluster, etc. And then when you plot them on maybe 3 or 2 dimensions, right? Because you cannot plot on 6 dimensions. But the color actually goes down 6 dimensions, right? This is the method one. The second method is that you just extract those data points on these, let's say, 3 dimensions bottom.
Yeah, that's what we did actually. We just extracted these data points that we are interested in and plotted them in the 3 dimensions.
I see. Basically, it's a select, right? So it's a SQL where operation, right, with range, and then you get those data for those dimensions, and then you do cluster after you select those data, right? So it's not on the entire data, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense because a lot of the IDs may need to be removed, right? So, okay, yeah. So because I know that you are gonna like publish some papers, right? So I think there's also some insights that you might consider. For example, maybe if it's more than the 4 dimensions, 3 or 4 dimensions that you are frequently using here, I think you can consider something like, for example, the last class we learned some like a dimensionality reduction, right? After reduced to 2 or 3 dimensions, then you can see the clusters, right, and see whether they make sense, right? Another thing that might be interesting is maybe, for example, outlier detection, right? So instead of, you can see that, for example, for the first plot here, most are on like the first column and the bottom row, right? So there are some, actually only in this plot, you have some outliers on the upper right corner, right? So that may be something interesting to look into, right? So because most of them are kind of in the L shape, right? So, and yeah, another thing you mentioned, a very interesting thing that is not explored is actually you mentioned is there's a lot of students like here, right? A lot of students want to finish the training, right? So potentially they will use GPU servers, right? We have only 18 servers, right? And each 4 cores. Maybe all those students are there, then it's quite crowded, right? So, and after maybe these 2 weeks, right, then no one is using it. Or maybe most of the servers are not. No,
I mean, for 18 nodes, you can have multiple people on the same node. So if you're not using 4 GPUs, which is the allocation for a node, then if you're using only 1 GPU or 2 GPUs, then
I understand. You can have 4 people allocated on one machine, right? But what I mean is actually this temporal pattern is interesting, right? So for example, you can, let's say, if during the normal time without exams, without final projects, maybe you can spin off. You can shut down like some of the servers to be energy efficient, right? Then you know that according to the pattern, like during the end of the semester with final projects, you should keep all of them running, right? So or you kind of spin off some of the servers dynamically in some way, right? So this temporal feature could be more interesting. And another thing, if I'm doing data mining, I would be interested in the bottlenecks at any time in from temporal perspective, right? So because you have a lot of RAM consumption, right? If let's say in bioinformatic like sequencing data, they need a 1 terabyte of data memory, right? Or hundreds of gigabytes of memory, right? So then 2 people who want to do the same thing, then that's a bottleneck, right? They have to use different machines, and if a lot of them are doing, then we don't have so many large RAM machines, right? Hosts, then potentially that's a bottleneck during this period, right? So this kind of bottleneck may not be so easy if you remove the temporal information, right? So like right now maybe GPUs are clustered, right? So that time, the actual absolute time dimension, not the elapsed time, may be a feature that is actually quite interesting to explore, right? And it can really be useful. Like you can shut down some machine when it's idle, right? So and then dynamically, turn on some machines according to the workload change, right? So another thing is that this I think is in Google data centers, right? So
actually, that's included in the Slurm configuration itself. So Slurm would be smart about, you can tune it and configure itself. So that's built into Slurm.
I see. Another thing I see that if you look at most of the job in all the plots, they have the red dots, right? A lot of red dots that are basically low consumption, right? I mean, they can run for a long time, right? Because you go all the way up, but not many results, right? So yeah, it would be interesting to see what are these jobs, right? So and the actual jobs, right? Some are running statistical analysis, some are running sequencing data, but maybe disk intensive. Right? Yeah. So why it's like this, right? So why they are not using a lot of resources, but they run for a long time, right? So what are they? These will be more interesting, right?
Yeah.
And also I see your most of the printing, you have the request mem CPU together, right? So maybe sometimes you just need a small memory, but the search space is high. You need a CPU to compute a lot, right? So some other times you need a lot of memory, but then you after loading, maybe it's very quick, right? So these 2 dimensions I put together, maybe because of the budget.
So these 2 points are the ones which we are going to explore further.
Because for
digging
jobs,
into what jobs.
For jobs they are totally different, right? So you are studying the jobs themselves, not just the budget, right? So and how to decide the budget, right? So I think a lot of interesting problem can be explored. Not just
there are a lot of questions that we want to answer, and that's why we started this. And I took this course just to answer those questions.
Yeah, I think these logs are very, very useful, very interesting. I wish you good luck with this research. Okay, thank you. And okay, so let's go to, I think it's the last talk by Huashuai Fan. The title is Implement the Mask RCN on Fastener Dataset. Okay. Huashuai, are you here?
Yeah.
Okay, let me identify you here. Okay, so let me make you co-host. Okay. All right, so now the stage is yours. Right.
Okay. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. Hello everyone. My name is Huashuai Fan. Today the topic of my presentation is implementing the mask RCN on the fastener data set. There are 2 parts of my presentation. The first part is introduction of mask RCN. The second part is some examples of my processing. Some examples of my process. The mask RCN is an instance segmentation algorithm. It is used to object detection and object classification, or it even can do in pixel level pinpoint detection. Compared with other algorithms, mask RCN is more fast, more accuracy, and it is easy to use. This is the workflow of the mask architecture. If you want to process one picture, first you need to input your picture and input it into a pre-trained neural network to obtain a feature map. Next, you will set the ROIS for each point of the picture in the feature map. So you will get a multiple candidate ROIS, and then you will send this ROIS into the RPN network for classification, regression, and you will filter out some ROIS. Next, you need to you will perform the ROI align this part into the remaining ROIS. That means you will combine some feature maps. Next slide, I will introduce more details. Finally, you can do mask generator, regression classification. This is the feature pyramid network in RPN. Take a picture of 1024 by 1024, for example. If you input the one picture, it will do some compressed. For my project, I use the ResNet 101, ResNet 101. This blue part, C2, means the original pictures have been compressed twice. And similarly, C5 means it has been compressed 5 times. After we get C2 and C5, then we will do convolution on C5 and do convolution to get the pink part. And then we do convolution again to get the P5 and do maximum polling on the P5, we will get P6. Return to this step. Based on the convolution of C5, we will upsampling it and add to the convolution of the C4, we will get P4. Similarly, we can get P2, P3. P2, P3, and P4, P5 can be used as feature map of classifier or the mask network. First, it can be used on classifier prediction box classifier prediction network to obtain the final prediction part. And you can also use mask segmentation network to obtain the segmentation result inside each prediction result. Next, I will introduce some steps of my process. This is show the original image and some masks. We have 5 classes: hand, nut, thread, washer, and pin. Next, we will compute the bounding boxes from the mask. We didn't use the original mask. We computed the new. We didn't use the original boxes from the original data set. We computed the new boxes from the mask. This will make us more easy to handle the boxes, and it will be more easy to resize or to rotate. Next,
Sorry, I didn't quite get you mentioned you didn't use the original masks that student provided.
No, the bounding boxes, not the mask.
Oh, okay. So you are using the bounding box of the mask, right? So you compute the bounding box out of the masks, right?
Yeah, yes.
So you are not doing the mask, right? So you are doing the detection, not the segmentation, right? So am I understanding correctly?
No, I just follow the steps.
Oh, so you are saying the steps, right? So you compute the bounding box and put in the data, right? Okay, I get what you want to say. All right. Okay. Yeah, you may move on.
Next, we need to resize the image. To support multiple images per batch, images are resized to one size. In this project, I resized it to 512 by 512. You can see the original shape is 22,000 times 4,000. Now it's 500 by 500.
Yeah, well, one question is, so I think the Muscasian will directly rescale it for you, right? So which library are you using? Is it
Muscasian? Yeah, I changed it. The original is, I forget it.
Oh, you mean so actually the scaling you are using their scaling, right? So originally the 1024, 1024. You change the parameter in the configure to 512.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, I changed it in configure.
I see. Okay.
Okay. We need to minimize the masks. The mask will be very large if we training on the high resolution image. For example, if you training on 1024 times 1024, it will be one instance of one mask will be 1 MB. If there is 100 masks on the pictures, it will be 100 MB. It will be too large and it will waste of time to train. So in order to improve the speed, so we need to minimize the masks. So we need to resize it. I resize it to 56 times 56. It will be more accuracy for each compared with this part, each mask. And this is the visualize of the mask class of the pictures.
Just a moment. Do you mean that you actually did the data augmentation yourself, or it's automatically scaled by mask the library that you just set aside of the library in configuration, right? So
I just set it in configuration.
Got it. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. This is the anchor of one picture. The order of anchor is very important. You need to use the same order in training and prediction phase, and it must match the order of the convolution. There are 3 types of anchors on one picture: the positive anchors, the negative anchors, and the narrow anchors. Narrow anchor is doesn't contribute to our training. So this picture so positive anchors.
Yeah. It's actually the negative anchors that cause the loss to potentially increase because the potential are positive, but student didn't annotate, right? So because anchor means there's some object in the box. So yeah, that's potential one reason that Minion's loss is increasing, but yeah, it's worth more exploration for sure. Yeah. Okay.
So this is the negative anchors of the pictures. This picture shows some ROIs of the pictures. just so 10, I set it. This is my detection result. It's not very good. There are some obviously objects it didn't detect. I'm still trying to optimize the algorithm, but the effect is not very clear.
Sure. Yeah. So I think for the other two presentations, they may already provide some hints to you. Like, I think one used for parameters, the probability threshold, right? So if you reduce it further to maybe 50%, maybe you will find more objects. Of course, you may find some wrong objects.
I said it is 70%, not 50.
I see. Yeah, you can try. I mean, you can try in the detection. You can reduce it, right? So because detection model, you configure, you can reduce it, right? You see whether it improves or not. Okay, training, maybe you can keep it. You can try though, right? So or maybe 60%, etc. Right?
I think I maybe still need to split the image. It will be better.
Oh, so you didn't split the image, right? So you are using an old image, right?
Yeah, I use the old.
Oh, if you use old image, this is actually a good result.
Really?
Yeah, because but for this image actually it's not, right? So but a lot of the other images, if you don't split, you cannot find anything because as you know, they will scale, right? So maybe originally you are very high resolution, but after scaling, maybe this whole thing scales down to 1 pixel, right? Then you definitely cannot detect it. Okay, so that's why we're splitting.
Yeah, maybe I still need to work on it.
But it's fine if you didn't split. You can just report the result you didn't split, right? So, but if you want to find a good result, I think splitting is necessary, right? But that will not be affect a lot in the grading because you didn't split, right? So this result is reasonable. Okay.
Okay, thank you. I will try later. So that's all about it.
Okay, thank you. So I think you used the ResNet 101, right? So, and okay, so I think that's a good talk, and thanks Hua Shuaifan. And so that's basically ends all our talks, right? So before ending, I would like to mention that if any students did a merging, just let me know, okay? Or you tried other methods like YOLO v3, v4, or SSD, those kind of. I know that a lot of other models that Mask has in, right? So that would be more interesting, right? So we can also share some of the solutions to the students so that they can see some different models also. Okay, so as I said, when you do merging, there will be overlapping objects. You want to use NMS, right? So if you know what it is, you can Google a little bit. It's just you can call function for that. Actually, there's a library implementing it. Okay, and finally, if you have difficulty train for a long time, remember to save the weights to disk, right? So then next time when you continue to train, you load the weights back. Okay, so this can cross a boundary of, let's say, the 12 hours of Shiha, right? Because Shiha, you almost have unlimited disk space, right? So you can save the model where you do the grade descent to a certain point and you save it, and next time you load it back and continue the grade descent, right? So that may be helpful for you to continue to train a really large model. Okay, yeah, so that's all for this semester, basically. And yeah, so this is the last week. So I know that everyone is busy, so please be reminded to submit all the last 2 assignments on time. Okay, so for the final project, we can afford to wait for 2 days, but no later. Okay, because I know that a lot of students are gonna submit late. Then we are doing last moment marking. We have to finalize the grade next Monday. Please be on time, okay? And if you are interested in, let's say, research, in my group, we do 3 different directions, right? So this machine learning AI is one, and parallel distributed computing is another, right? So another is, algorithm research, right? So these 3, if you are interested, you can also contact me, but we do require you to have some background. And we will have a tutorial in IEEE Big Data, talking about some recent research of ours. I'm sharing the information here in the chat. So if you are interested, just let me know. Okay, we might be able to share the remote conference link to you guys. Okay, it's about the distributed computing. It's not really the machine learning side. Okay, so it's another branch of research. And yeah, so that's all that for today. Okay, if you have any question, please feel free to ask me. Otherwise, I will just end this this class. Thank you. Thank you all for the excellent talk today. Okay, so I don't see anyone having any more questions. In that case, I will just end this session. And if you have any questions, feel free to send me email. Bye. Bye. Good night.